Imagine standing on a dock in Philadelphia Harbor in 1943. Fog lifting off the Delaware, the clang of metal, the thrum of engines, and a destroyer escort sitting quietly in the water. Then you blink, and it's gone. No splash, no drift, only ripples left behind. Moments later, it's reportedly spotted hundreds of miles away in Norfolk, Virginia. Then, just as quickly, it blinks back into Philadelphia. But there are sailors aboard, and some return burned, some are missing entirely, and some, well, legend claims they're part of the ship now. Welcome back to Time Slipped, where history occasionally forgets what dimension it's in. I'm Nikki Rich, and today we're tracing one of the strangest legends to drift through American naval history. The story of a ship that didn't just vanish, it supposedly fell through time itself. This is the Philadelphia experiment, and the question that still hangs over it isn't just what happened, it's what if? October 28, 1943. The Philadelphia Naval Shipyard is alive with movement. Metal on metal, the echo of hammer strikes, the scent of something burnt, as if the sky itself had short-circuited. The war effort has swallowed the city whole. Among hundreds of vessels in production, one ship, the USS Eldridge, a brand new destroyer escort, is being wired for something unusual. Technicians feed heavy cables through the hull, snaking them past the generators and into unfamiliar machinery near the bridge. Officially, it was a test of electromagnetic degaussing, a process meant to hide ships from magnetic mines. Unofficially, it was something else entirely. According to surviving letters and later testimony, observers said the air around the ship shimmered. Compass needles twitched. Green mist rose from the water. Then, in an instant, the Eldridge was gone. A few minutes later, sailors in Norfolk, Virginia, over 200 miles away, reported a Navy destroyer suddenly appearing out of thin air. Same markings as the Eldridge, same profile. They watched in disbelief as it hovered in the harbor, surrounded by a haze of green light. Then, just as quickly, it vanished. Back in Philadelphia, the Eldridge allegedly reappeared exactly where it had been, but what came back wasn't the same ship. The men aboard stumbled off the ship looking pale, disoriented, eyes bloodshot from some light no one else could see. In the strangest accounts, a few were fused into the bulkheads, literally part of the ship's steel. Still alive for moments, still screaming. And some didn't make it back at all. One story tells of two brothers panicked, disoriented, grabbing each other and jumping overboard as the deck began to glow. But they didn't hit water. They fell through something else. A kind of tunnel. A silence that wasn't empty, but dense. That's the story of the USS Eldridge, but as you can imagine, the official Navy record is a bit more straightforward. Here it is. The ship was commissioned August 1943, deployed to the Mediterranean, and decommissioned after the war. That's it. Nothing about teleportation, invisibility, or men trapped in steel. Perhaps trying to keep something secret? Think about it. A classified experiment during wartime? That's all a rumor needs to thrive. For a decade, the story floats quietly through dockyards and veteran reunions, but by the mid-1950s, it surfaces in the most unlikely of places, inside a letter. Morris K. Jessup was an astronomer who'd strayed into UFO research, not because he wanted fame, but because he wanted answers. He'd written a book called The Case for the UFO, a speculative exploration into whether anti-gravity could explain strange aerial phenomena, and he never expected fan mail. The first letter arrived in a plain envelope, Pennsylvania postmark. Inside, 3 pages of alternating ink colors, uneven type, and urgent tone. Signed Carlos Miguel Allende. Allende claimed he'd seen the impossible. While serving aboard the SS Andrew Fruseth, he said he'd witnessed a Navy destroyer, the Eldridge, vanish and reappear before his eyes in 1943. In his words, the Navy had applied Einstein's unified field theory, an unfinished hypothesis that sought to merge gravity and electromagnetism into one force. According to Allende, they'd succeeded, and men had died for it. Jessup dismissed him at first, but the letters were compellingly weird. He felt that strange pull between disbelief and curiosity, because under the rambling, the message was clear. Your book is right. The government already did this. I saw it. So, Jessup wrote back, politely asking for evidence. Allende responded with 3 more letters, each stranger than the last. He sent detailed sketches of a magnetic vortex in motion, lines spiraling inward like something alive. He also sent coordinates of alleged experiments and cryptic references to crewmen caught between dimensions. And despite all of it, he warned Jessup to stop his research, that he was already too close. Then, in 1957, the story took a bureaucratic detour worthy of a spy novel. At the Office of Naval Research in Washington, D.C., a package arrived with no return address. Inside was a copy of Jessup's The Case for the UFO. Every page was covered in notes, 3 distinct handwritings arguing in the margins about propulsion, anti-gravity, and something they called the Great Experiment. So, the Navy brought Jessup in to examine it all. Now, this part gets me, because how would he know? Was Jessup a handwriting analyst? I have no idea, but he was able to recognize one immediately. A lens. And don't forget this guy, we'll come back to him later. The other 2 writers, though, they remain unknown. But the annotations read like a conversation between people who had been there. Then, for whatever reason, the Navy decided to quietly have the book reproduced for internal distribution. Only a few copies were made, and that annotated volume became known as the Vero edition. Real copies still exist today, filled with the same jittery handwriting and cryptic equations. The Navy never endorsed the contents, but they didn't destroy it either. Instead, they made copies, then cataloged and stored it. And once a story has a government file number, it's no longer just a rumor. It's archived uncertainty. By the 1960s, the Philadelphia experiment had drifted from private letters into public folklore. It surfaced at UFO conferences, in pulp magazines, and on late-night radio, whispered like a confession from the margins of science. The story found fertile ground in a world already paranoid about secrecy. The Cold War had taught everyone that the government could hide extraordinary things behind ordinary words. And it's true, the Navy was experimenting with powerful electromagnetic fields. But the goal wasn't teleportation. It was protection. Remember, they were degaussing ships, which means they were running electric cables around the hull to cancel out the vessel's magnetic field so German mines wouldn't detect it. It was a clever wartime defense, not a doorway through space-time. But still, imagine being a sailor watching a destroyer wrapped in thick copper coils, humming under floodlights, the air sharp with ozone. Add fog, exhaustion, and military secrecy, and invisibility starts to sound less like fiction. Now we'll fast forward to the 80s, because by then, word about the vanishing ship had spread all the way to Hollywood. In 1984, a movie titled The Philadelphia Experiment is released. It's a film dramatizing the story of two sailors catapulted from 1943 into the future. For most people, it was a popcorn movie, but for one man, it was a recovered memory. Al Bialik, an engineer from the Midwest, claimed that as he watched the film, flashes of another life surged through him. Vivid, physical memories of being aboard the Eldridge. He said his real name had been Edward Cameron, and that his brother Duncan had served beside him. When the ship began to disappear, they jumped overboard. But instead of hitting water, they fell through a swirling tunnel of light and awoke in 1983 inside a secret facility beneath Montauk, New York. There, according to Bialik, scientists told them the experiment on the Eldridge had created a rift between 1943 and 1983, 2 points linked on the same electromagnetic current, like a cosmic Chinese finger trap, where the harder they pulled apart, the tighter reality held them together. To close the loop, the brothers had to go back where they came from. And so they did. Al described the return as being pulled backward through a funnel of lightning. Then they regained consciousness back on the Eldridge, just as it rematerialized in the harbor. Afterward, Bialik claimed, the Navy erased them completely. We're talking age regression, new identities, wiped memories. So he lived as Al Bialik for decades, unaware of his previous life, until that fateful day when he watched a movie about his past and it cracked the vault of his mind wide open. In the years that followed, he became a fixture at conferences and on early internet message boards, calmly describing not only Philadelphia, but a larger network of projects, like Project Montauk, a rumored government project in the 80s exploring mind control, teleportation, and time travel. To many, his claims sounded delusional. To others, they connected dots no one else dared draw. Bialik framed the two experiments as halves of one system. The Philadelphia experiment opened a portal, and Montauk learned to control it. The same energy, looping across 40 years. And the more he talked, the more people began to fill in the blanks. And that's where conspiracy thrives. Not in proof, but in possibility. Because when you tell a story about secret experiments in time, reality starts to feel optional. Pop quiz. Carlos Allende. Remember him? Well, years later, it's discovered he was someone else entirely. His real name was Carl Meredith Allen. He was a merchant marine with a fascination for physics and a flair for drama. And he couldn't make up his mind. Sometimes he claimed he'd invented it all, and other times he swore the Navy had silenced him. Either way, by the end, the legend had a life of its own, and Carl was just watching from the shoreline. And like the ship itself, the legend kept reappearing. In books, documentaries, late-night radio, early internet forums, and now think Reddit, Wikipedia. Each new retelling adding another layer. Now we have to ask the question, could something like this really happen? If we're talking about an entire destroyer and its crew disappearing from a naval dock, probably not. But when you zoom into the smallest scales of the universe, the lines between what's possible and impossible start to blur. The same equations that once made 1940s physicists uneasy, ideas about bending space, warping time, and splitting particles, are now the foundation of modern science. Today we have invisibility materials that bend light and radar around solid objects. No vanishing destroyers, no missing sailors, but still, faint echoes of the same dream. Maybe the Navy wasn't trying to break physics. Maybe they were brushing against it. The Philadelphia experiment arrived at the perfect intersection of fear and wonder, the atomic age when science could both save us and erase us. It endures for the same reason we still whisper about Roswell, Area 51, or the Montauk Project. Mystery, forbidden science, government intrigue, and the possibility that someone, somewhere, actually cracked time. Here's what we know. There was a ship. There were letters, real ones. And there was fog. The rest might be true. Stories like this survive because deep down, we don't just fear they're possible, we hope they are. And if you stand on the docks of Philadelphia long enough, listening to the river breathe under the fog, you might start to wonder too, if something once slipped through and the world just quietly sealed itself shut again. I'm Nikki Rich, and this has been Time Slipped. If you've ever walked into a fog and come out somewhere you can't explain, send your story to glitch@timeslippedpod.com. You can also find us on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram. And until next time, keep your eyes on the water, and if something disappears, maybe wait a minute. It might just come back.